So I'm going to get right into it from here. This is a talk that I'm calling Goblin Mode, prioritizing playfulness in the creative process. So I figured, what do I have to give to people that are mostly designers, programmers, is a talk about creativity and cultivating it. So I have decided to frame this in a way that is themed around one of the games that I did soundtrack for, Ashenat's Gobsmacked. Basically, the way this talk is going to go is I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've taught creativity to some of my music students, a little overview of what I think cultivates that kind of mindset, and a little bit of how I implemented that when I made the soundtracks for Ashenat's Gobsmacked, which released about a year ago, and Ashenat's Existential Treads, which just launched a demo on Steam today, in fact. That's synergy happening for me today there. Okay, so let's hop right into it here. As a teacher of music, I had a lot of students asking me, how do I be creative? How do I write a song? How do I learn how to make things? And the answer is that you have to be listening a lot, frankly. First point here is that you are a unique bubbling cauldron of experiences and influences. The things that you consume, the things that you enjoy, are going to be a key part of how you end up creating. And no one is going to be quite the same as you just because of the content you consume, the things that you find joy in. It's never quite the same from person to person, as I'm sure we all know. Secondly, stretching this metaphor a little bit more, the more you add to the stew, the richer it gets. So what I encourage my students to do often is to be listening to a lot of music, because again, that's the field that I work in, and to be trying to learn as many little bits and pieces, full songs, full albums, as many different artists as you can, because to me, all the act of being creative is pulling out all those influences and subconscious ideas that bubble up to the surface when you're just trying to make something. So obviously, the more material you have to pull from, the more successful you're going to be. Thirdly, stir periodically with practice. So this is really just the crux of the issue, which is if you want to learn to be creative, you have to try to be creative. And this is where the word playfulness comes in. When you think about doing music or an instrument, the verb is play, which I think is a big part of being creative. The question usually being, what happens if I do this? What happens if I tried this scale or this chord? What happens if I tried to copy my favorite songwriter's chord progression, but like put a different rhythm to it from another songwriter that I learned from? And simply the act of doing this frequently will lead you down a path of wanting to do it more often, because it's just plain fun, really. So that is, I think, the main thing you should be doing once you've been listening to as many things or interacting with as many things. You and people as game designers would probably just get this from playing as many different kinds of games as you can, but also you can pull from literature, from music, from art, really anything that could just give you a little extra to work with here. And finally, our fourth point, a fourth thing that really strains this metaphor, I didn't really have any back front, it's just fun. So, there you are. Okay, moving into the key theme here is key goblin traits. Now, I am using the identity of the goblin to sort of give people an idea of what I mean by playfulness in creativity here. So if you look at goblins across media and perhaps real life, you will see that there are three traits that are common to all of them. Firstly, not afraid to be weird. Secondly, knows their tools. And third, part of a group. Never really see a lone goblin in your fantasy media, I would say. Handful of common goblins here from, of course, your D&D style goblin, David Bowie from Labyrinth, the Green Goblin from Spider-Man, and of course the lead singer of AC/DC, who I find quite goblin-like as well. All of these exhibit these three key goblin traits here. So let's move into not afraid to be weird. When you think of a goblin, you really do think of a weird little guy. I don't think you've ever thought of a buttoned up, very formal type of creature when you think of a goblin, and I think that is a strength when it comes to creativity. Not normal equals more interesting is a key point here, and I know normal is sort of a loaded term with like what that means for like what people tend to be in the average, but what I really mean here is that your average thing, your normal everyday thing, is just by definition a little bit less remarkable. So when you are being creative, I think one of the best things you could do is simply go for something that's out of the ordinary, which seems a little bit self-explanatory, but it's something that's tough to do for a lot of people, and it's tough to do for me for quite a long time as I was learning Minecraft. I often see like a lot of content out there that is like, you scroll on YouTube and top 5 mistakes that you're making as a producer or a game designer. Don't do this, you should try this. The #1 thing that the pros do. And to me, those can be helpful, but it's often quite misleading because the first thing you should be going for is, what do you find interesting? And again, coming back to the question that I think everyone should be asking themselves constantly, what happens if I do this? Secondly, playfulness leads to discovery, which is just restating what I said right there, where the more you ask yourself, what happens if I try this? What happens if I combine these ideas? What happens if I just try something new? You will discover both what you do like, what you don't like, what works and what doesn't work. The pitfall here, of course, can be that that's a lot of time spent. And often people can feel like, if I'm not creating something with a product at the end, if I don't have something by the end of this, well, then that was time wasted. But I think the discovery aspect is also learning what you did not enjoy, what doesn't work for you, the methodology or workflow that works best for you. Thirdly, shamelessness is a superpower. This is something that I think a lot of us can learn from. Very often, society wants us to act and behave a certain way, and that's of course very good in just keeping things running smoothly, but when it comes to creativity, I think it is kryptonite. Simply because if you're afraid to try something because you think it might look silly or weird, then you're probably just gonna not end up with as many fun ideas in the end. Okay. Lastly, you can't satisfy everyone, so you might as well be self-satisfied. I spent a lot of time trying to work this 4th point to not sound a little weird, but that's the best I can come up with. And really what this means is, of course, if you are creative of any kind, you're posting stuff publicly, you will quickly learn via internet comments that you're not gonna make everyone happy. So in that respect, you might as well try stuff that you want to try. And I think, again, summarizing this is just don't be afraid to be weird. Don't be afraid to be yourself. Secondly, know zero tools. Obviously, if you're trying to do something a little bit weird, there is a limit to that, in that if you're totally outside of the realm of what people have been doing commonly, you're not going to have the language to interact with them. What I mean by this is that there is a certain level of technical facility you must achieve with your medium or style or skill set or whatever you're working with to be able to express yourself creatively, I think, generally there. So first point, sharp knives cut more effectively. Of course, yet another metaphor for knowing how your particular tool set works deeply is going to be a powerful tool in your toolbox. In the realm of music, this is, of course, knowing your instrument, but in being a composer, this is also knowing all of your software, your digital audio workstations, your plugins, your virtual instruments, your real instruments, and of course, your theory and composition techniques and things like that, and learning from others. The better you know each individual tool you are using, the more effectively you can make instinctual decisions, effectively cutting down on that time that could lead to something that you enjoy. Secondly, here, an adventure doesn't have to have treasure to be fun, really restating the point I made earlier that You don't always have to end up with something that you can sell at the end of it. You don't always have to end up with something that's even usable for you, because part of the journey of knowing your tools is, again, learning what doesn't work for you personally. Thirdly here, build your ideal loadout, some gamer terminology for you here. Once you get to know what tools you enjoy the most and what works for you, you're going to want to have an efficient kit. As a music producer, perhaps the biggest stumbling block you can run into is sort of the plug-in and instrument treasure trove. When I'm selecting an instrument, there's a whole library of things that I've cultivated and downloaded over the years, so paring it down to the stuff that works best for you can also lead you down more efficient paths and just better instincts about what is going to work in your process. Of course, that doesn't discount trying out a new thing every once in a while. It's boring to stick with the same old, obviously. And lastly, I think this is the most important part here for this particular point, the aesthetic and functional language of your medium or style is your deepest toolbox. And what this really means is not only knowing your tools, but knowing the environment that you are interacting with. It is very easy, especially if you're like a solo game dev or like a solo composer like myself, to kind of get lost in your own world. And learning what are the most common tools or ideas or methods that people use to communicate a certain idea is going to be one of the key elements of expressing yourself to others in a way that they can pick up what you're putting down, essentially. Now, it's not going to work seamlessly every single time. The way you can put this as a musician is if I were to present you with a song that I wrote, most people might take a slightly different interpretation of any lyrics or melodies or vibes or instruments that I used, different associations that we are making from the instrumentation or the length of the song or anything like that. In game design, you could think of this as perhaps, what types of systems you are implementing in your game. There is a vibe to, say, a game where you pull up a menu and you have 5 million stats in front of you versus a game where you have 3 or 4 controls at your hands, shall we say. So really the point here is that if you know the sorts of things that give you a certain vibe or mood or feeling when you are trying to be creative, more than likely there are going to be some people out there that pull the same sorts of emotional responses from that. And this is going to be your biggest and most important tool set when it comes to communicating ideas with people. Okay, thirdly, part of the group. Big point here that I had to learn the hard way. In fact, for a long time, I thought if I just got good enough at my instrument, if I just got good enough at composing, people would come to me. People, I would eventually get that respect or that audience just from how good I made something. And I only learned a handful of years ago that the best way to cultivate your own creativity, the best way to be seen is to simply be part of a group. First point, assembling the work takes time. As a musician, I've been involved in the Boston heavy metal scene for quite some time. I've been playing with my band Grave Warren for like 10 years now, and a bunch of other acts as like a fill-in guitar player or bass player. And I spent the better half of that decade really trying to promote my own stuff more than actively listening to what other people had to offer, what other people had to say. And I think that was a critical error, actually. And learning to simply listen and interact and be more mindful of what other people are making is another powerful tool in the toolbox, because that is going to feed back into that bubbling cauldron of influences and ideas. And honestly, getting to know other people and creatives is a huge boon to your own personal creativity. Basically, that's the second point that I have here. Even the lone wolves exist in an ecosystem. As much as you would like to think you can get there totally on your own, there is still an environment that you are working in. And although I think we are encouraged to be somewhat competitive, especially in sort of your end stage capitalist society, shall we say, it's important to understand that no matter what you do, you're part of an existing web of people that are interacting at all times, and you're standing on the shoulders of many, many people that have come before you. So learning from them is also only going to do you some good. Thirdly, I'm sure all of you here that have had the problem of like, okay, let's make a game, let's make a song, let's write a book, let's write any creative pursuit. The blank canvas syndrome is perhaps the worst thing that can happen to you, or also just plain, I've hit a block in the middle of this. And I have found pretty much always that the most powerful way to get over that is to simply ask someone else, hey, what do you think? Going back to that idea that everyone is their own unique bubbling cauldron of ideas and perspectives and influences, the way something that you've created is going to hit everyone is going to be a little bit different. So finding people that are both in your ballpark of influences and ideas and things that they enjoy and well outside that ballpark is pretty important, I think, to checking how whatever you are creating is affecting people, how it's hitting people. And if you have a handful of people that are on both sides of that, I think that is usually the best method for getting over these humps, is just seeing how it hits them all, saying, what do you think? Maybe you'll even be surprised by the people that are coming from a perspective that is wildly different from your own, that don't even like the same things as you do. And finally, you don't have to be a master of everything. It's very common nowadays for everyone to be multidisciplinary, I think. Speaking as a musician, you can't really just coast on being good on your instrument and just that. You often have to be able to record yourself well, decent at music production, and then of course the whole social media aspect of promoting yourself via little 10-second, 15-second Instagram reels. Because God forbid you're not doing that, and then you're not in front of everyone's faces all the time. Okay, so that was the segment of how to be a goblin that you can take home with you. Moving on from here, I would like to talk about how I implemented these ideas in the game soundtracks that I worked on for Ash and Adam, a game developing duo that works in the New England area. They contacted me, like I mentioned at the top of this talk, because fellow organizer here at Boston Post Marbles and the county posted my info in Boston Game Dev Slack, and then just cold emailed me out of the blue, not because they liked anything in the game music, sort of spec music that I made as a portfolio, but because they actually enjoyed my heavy metal band, Graveborn's output more than anything. And I decided to hop on with them just because it sounded like, well, a fun ride. So the first game I worked on with them was Gobsmacked. That is a sort of first-person arena fighter roguelite sort of thing where you are a little goblin that is heading into small, like 2-minute arenas, fighting some junky robots in a post-apocalyptic setting. So the design philosophy behind this game was a lot of like blood sport and mischief, reveling in junky mayhem with a slightly monstrous vibe that I tried to pull off in the music. The instrumentation here was a lot of heavy metal guitar, and then to get the arena feel, I pulled from some taiko drums, which are like these big, huge Japanese sort of like timpani adjacent sort of drums. Some junk percussion that I pulled from a contact instrument library that I spent $20 on. It was just on this very GeoCities-like ancient web page that was still selling this instrument library, which is basically someone had recorded themselves hitting various things in their kitchen, which was a wonderful way to add that junky vibe to this soundtrack. There were also some war horns that I got from a service called Splice. If you're not familiar with Splice, it is basically a sort of subscription service sample library that producers can use to grab, say, a small loop that they can chop up and reconfigure or do what they need to create a song. Sometimes it's like a 10-second loop of a particular couple bars of music. Sometimes it's just a one-shot. These war horns were this very just like one-shot kind of sound that was in some sample pack that was like dance music based, but I found it hit the arena vibe quite well. And of course, some crowd participation, which I got from some claps that were part of Logic Pro's built-in Apple Loops library. And finally, I did some character and crowd sound effects work for this game as well, which I got from some of my friends just being silly in a room while I recorded them with a microphone. So let's go over some bits and pieces here. I have some audio for us here. Let's test the volume by checking out an isolated taiko drum part that I composed. So very, arena heavy kind of drum, big, huge sound, a lot of sort of if you look very closely here at the MIDI notes that I played in here, if you know anything about programming MIDI and drum parts here, that's a very strange looking set of MIDI notes because there's a lot of notes stacked on top of each other like that. That is because I played these in by literally smashing my hands on MIDI keyboard, just willy-nilly, essentially. So this was my Goblin moment for this because I did not want to sit there and painstakingly program in every single taiko kit. I figured, why not just go at it like a goblin and see what I came up with? If you listen closely at that, you might have heard some like phasing stuff happening with the audio, which is what happens when you have two samples that are exactly the same, just ever so slightly off from each other, which is technically an audio no-no, but I like the sound of it, and I thought it just added a fun, playful energy, and I do not like programming specific velocities in when I can just slap them in with my own two hands. Same idea was implemented for this kitchen percussion part. This is from that audio library that I mentioned before. I believe it was called Lockdown Kitchen, actually. Probably something that the instrument library coder made while being locked down from COVID, but here's that part. Really just a lot of forks and knives and pots and pans, also programmed in by slapping it into a MIDI keyboard. Then of course we got our stadium class happening here. So these again, just stock Apple Logic Loop library here. Very useful for getting that stadium crowd sound happen. Then of course we have this stick sample, heavily processed here. This is also a splice loop that I grabbed just because it was sort of like drumsticks clacking against some kind of surface, and I thought it also gave that sort of arena vibe if I splashed it in an absurd amount of reverb. So you're really clearly just getting the attack of these in here. They just sound nice and far away, as if you're hearing them from afar. Up next, oops, not quite that far. We have our warhorns. This is that splice sample I mentioned before. What you're hearing here is the sample duplicated twice, so a stack of 3, pitched slightly differently to create a specific chord that I thought sounded very arena-like. And that just repeats at multiple points throughout the song, just like a fun little stat. So those are all of the arena instruments. I will play all of them together here. Really getting that sort of arena blood sport vibe, I think, about effects. And I combined that with my heavy metal influences from the string instruments. This is my 8-string guitar playing a riff here. A brief aside here about choice of musical scale here. This is part of that knowing your language thing that I mentioned earlier. Guitar is obviously my primary instrument and something that I have the most facility on. A lot of these other things are just rhythm instruments where I've played a drum set a couple of times before, but it is not my primary language with which I compose. The guitar, however, I use primarily a sort of, if you know anything about music theory, a pentatonic scale with a lot of chromaticism in that. And really, if you have no music theory background, what that means is generally it's going to feel a little bit rock and roll, a little bit blues based from that. Combine that with the very low tuned 8-string guitar, and you have this sort of overly cool guy vibe, I would call. It's like a riff that has sunglasses on, was the way I would describe that. Combine that, of course, with a nice distorted bass part, also from my heavy metal influence. And here are those two string parts together where we are getting our heavy metal vibes. Little heavy metal production tip for you. It's never just the guitar, it's just the bass that makes things sound heavy. It's both of them together that does it. And finally, everything all together. So basically the effect there of combining, I think, the playfulness of me just smacking things in my studio with the arena drums and the language that I've cultivated over years of studying guitar results in that sort of upbeat, heavy metal, arena blood sport vibe. Okay, moving into some of the sound effects work that I did here. Astronaut asked me to basically make the sound effects for the player character in the game, as well as some extra crowd noise. So like sort of the goblin crowd that is watching you and throwing gold coins at you as you perform better in the game. So as someone that didn't have a whole ton of resources available to me or voice actors on speed dial, I simply asked a friend of mine, a creative partner that I've worked with for quite some time. Her name's Paris. She does vocals in local metal act Concilium. She is my co-host on a podcast I do, Terrible Book Club, that I've done for 10 years with her at this point, so something that I trust quite a bit. And it's very easy to ask her to, hey, can you just record yourself making weird noises for me? So here is a segment of some of her raw audio that she sent me. So this is completely unprocessed, Paris making some odd goblin noises. A shrew friend really be able to do that. Here is me using my toolkit of various plugins, like a little bit of overdrive, a little bit of chorus, a little bit of formant shifting, to just make her sound a little bit more goblin-y. There we go. Adding into that, actually I wanted some layer of animalisticness to it, so I spent a lot of time searching for the right kind of animal sounds to add in as a layer underneath Paris's voiceover work. We settled on the hyena being the best option, thanks to freesound.org for providing some hyena samples for me here. This is some unprocessed hyena. I spent some time cutting up minutes and minutes and minutes of hyena audio to match the cadence of Paris's voice acting, pitch shifted a little bit, also added the same sort of treatments of like overdrive and chorus and formant shifting to give you this. And then finally, of course, all together. for the final player character sound effects there. So a lot of fun to be had there. Now, for the crowd sounds, I asked Paris as well as another friend of ours, a former roommate actually, to stand in a room while I had a microphone around them, acting as unhinged as possible. So perhaps some of my favorite audio of the evening is the two of them standing in the side room in my house with incredibly untreated room happening here. So another audio no-no. However, that resulted in something like this. Listen, if you get two people that stand in a room and make that noise for you, they're real friends. I mixed this with a little bit of a hyena pack audio, so this is a whole group of hyenas. There's actually also a lion in the background there, stalking this hyena pack, which I had to do some clever EQing out of. And then Ash and Adam had been using some like sort of stock crowd sounds to sort of create these like cheater sound effects when they did something particularly goblin-y. So this one goes. Some Bob's favorite crowd noise there. Take all that, cut it up, blend it together, do some more, hey, what happens if I do this to the audio, and you get something like this. A true reveling crowd of goblins that you have pleased. Okay, so that is a very brief overview of my work on Gobsmacked. Moving into Ash and Adam's Existential Treads, which is a game that I completed the soundtrack for just this month. Like I said at the top of the talk, the demo just dropped on Steam today. This one is more about sort of community folksiness and sort of a general vibe of AI versus humanity. This is a sort of city builder slash tower defense slash old school tank shooter sort of game where you control a tank on these sort of like post-apocalyptic islands with buildings that you are slowly destroying and rescuing settlers from. You bring them back to the settlement and you get a random set of buildings to choose from. You build that out to defend against the noise, sort of a remnant of AI gone haywire that caused the apocalypse. The instrumentation here is a lot more folksy than Gobsmacked. We had a lot more acoustic guitar, sort of low gain electric guitar instead of my 8-string coming out for this. Some folksy drums and percussion, some harmonica and melodica, which I do not know how to play that well, but still used. And for the sort of battle waves where you are defending from the noise, a little bit more punk rock, some strange sound effects, and some synthiness just to get that sort of AI vibe there. Okay, so once again, rolling through some of the material here. This is sort of a basic acoustic guitar layer. Now the fun I had there was that in a lot of folkier sort of styles of music, the open guitar tuning is a lot more common than standard guitar tuning. And for those of you that don't know, open guitar tuning is simply when you tune all the strings of guitar so that when you strum them without fretting anything, it creates some chord as opposed to the standard guitar tuning, which is a lot of stacked perfect fourths and a major third in there somewhere as well. I pulled this particular open tuning from a song that I had attempted to learn a piece of from a very prolific and awesome fingerstyle guitarist named Mike Dawes. He had this tune called Cloud Catcher that I was just trying to learn the first few bars for because it's an incredibly difficult and intricate song. And it had this very, very strange tuning that I'd never seen before. So I threw my guitar in that tuning and just decided to see what happens if I play in this tuning. So I got those chords. On top of that, I layered some of these electric guitar strums and bits. This is standard tuning against the open tuning from the acoustic guitar part. And then of course some bass here, also standard tuning bass. working with the open tuning on the acoustic. Speaking of the language there, the scale and note choice there reminds me a lot of the Chrono Cross soundtrack, actually. So some of those melodic ideas I lifted pretty directly from some of the bits of that soundtrack. Real random influences on my sleeve there. Now, with folky percussion, once again, not primarily a drummer, so I actually pulled this from Logic's drummer function, which is essentially sort of plugin you could use that's built into Logic, where it will take a look at the tracks that you've recorded already, sort of analyze the rhythm, and you have a varying set of like different fake drummers in there. Literally they call like Steve and Dave and Richard, and they can come in and pretend that they're like session drummers for you. So I used some of the more folky / psychedelic drummers in there, manipulated them somewhat after the fact that they just weren't going to fill the way that I wanted to create this kind of part. It's a lot more cajon, a lot more tambourine, a lot more shakers and a proper drum kit, although in certain parts of this soundtrack there is drum kit also doubling the given parts. More playfulness in this harmonica part. I do not know how to play harmonica that much aside from knowing when it's in key or not. If you don't know how harmonica works, they are pretty much locked into one key. I purchased 2 harmonicas that were in the area of the key that I had composed a lot of this particular track in, one in G and one in E, and I simply let the track play and breathe in and out until I found a satisfactory chord that the harmonica played. And I kind of used it as like this pad texture just to add a little background. Learned a lot about breath control when dealing with the harmonica there. Melodica here, offering a similar texture just with a slightly different kind of vibe. Blanca a lot easier to play because you have a little keyboard with which to manipulate your notes. So yeah, again, similar texture there. This finally is just a little acoustic lead part that went over the top. Also in the open tuning that I mentioned before. A part like this you really only get from open tunings. You can't really play this sort of same thing on a standard tune guitar. It sounds pretty simple, and it is, but it's really only accessible if you have the strings tuned a certain way. And finally, all together for this particular segment of the track. So once again, really leading into the folkier vibe, the language that I picked up from learning a handful of singer-songwriter type songs from when I was first picking up the instrument and learning my basic chords. Okay, in the interest of time here, I am only going to show a handful of specifically odd bits from the battle music that happens in Existential Tread. So this is much more in the sort of heavy metal punk rock wheelhouse that I am familiar with. But I thought I would highlight the sort of weird synth lead parts that I wrote in here. And again, speaking about knowing your language here, I try to lean into the chromaticism aspect because these are sort of AI gone haywire that are attacking your settlement here. So a lot of atonality, which basically means not really sticking to a specific scale, playing any old random note in such a way that you are left somewhat aimless. There's no tonal center to be had here. Let me get this kind of sound. Good luck finding a key center there. These noise sound effects are not necessarily the exact sound effects that one of the developers, Ash, actually implemented when like the noise are attacking the settlement, but something that I created by asking myself what would happen if I plugged in a bunch of random guitar pedals, put some really extra weird vocoder settings in Logic Pro through those pedals, and just flipped knobs around until I got some weird sound, and I ended up getting something like this. I sort of happened upon just a sort of evil laugh texture that I thought would go great for sort of like an initiating battle sequence. So here it is with all the other string instruments and your very bog standard sort of punk rock drums as well. So once again, very, very different from the other vibe here where we are trying to highlight sort of that AI run amok kind of feeling there. Okay, that is my work for Existential Treads and Gobsmacked, and I thought I would also show a sort of pet project of mine, really putting my money where my money where my mouth is, I should say, because this is a project that started as a funny idea, or an idea that I thought was funny with, again, my creative partner that I mentioned before. Some of you may know this project from me mentioning it in the Tiny Mask Games Discord, but I will let the YouTube video speak for itself here.
Only WGBH tells us. What day and I'm dead. To beat their local dumps in pilgrimage to the land that dirty water.
So, Dark Souls is a sound mod for Dark Souls Remastered for PC, whose design philosophy is simply, what if everyone in Lord had a thick Boston accent? And I really do think this embodies the goblin mentality, because no one wants this, no one asked for this, I just thought it was funny. And that I was curious what would happen if I put this out there. So I am slowly changing all voice dialogue and subtitles in Dark Souls Remastered with friends and acquaintances, and some people that have actually cold emailed me after finding out about this project, with people doing Boston accents and rewriting lines in universe here. I've also done some sound effect rejiggering and some lore rewrites. Particular favorite here, of course, is the Estus flask being redone as the iced Estus from Dunkin' Donuts. I did this by taking the Estus flask sound effect and layering it with me shaking a nearly drank iced coffee from Dunkin' Donuts in front of my microphone. Consumable souls are just mumpkins from Mount to the White Substone is a title card. One of my favorites is the area discovery or area entry sound. I sort of just pitched down and layered with the green line screech for when you are staying on Park Street. And personal favorite discovery of mine, I found out that the boss defeat sound effect almost perfectly lines up with the WGBH station identifier sound from like the 80s. I think they still use it sometimes in terms of like how it decays. So check this out. I did zero manipulation. I just stuck them on top of each other. I don't know what that means, but it's there. So this was simply just a fun project that I decided to do at the behest and sort of goaded by my friend, and eventually decided, well, I had to do something for the Tiny Math Games Discord. So I went for it, and I started posting about it on my social media. I had a bunch of friends and acquaintances from the local Boston heavy metal community come out and say like, hey, yeah, I'll try that, which was very surprising to me. I currently have about 10 characters out of 37 done so far, so it's in sort of a beta release while I go around asking other people to do it. I would like to highlight one in particular that I will play a minute or two of. This is a redo of Andre of Astora, the blacksmith that you first encounter early on in the game. This was done by an acquaintance of mine that I had interacted with maybe a total of 2 times ever in my life, Josh Staples of the local metal bands Abnormality and a bunch of others, but Abnormality is probably the one that most people know him from. And honestly, Josh was born to do this. He just sounds like what you're about to hear. He didn't have to put on any extra accent here. Also, fair warning, this is the cussing part of the program here. Andre of Astora, of course, a blacksmith, so we went with a very blue-collar vibe here.
Sup, dude? I'm Luke Matt. Fucking hot shit out of here. Took the world by the balls. Hot shit. Hey, do you need anything for it while I got you here? Don't get me wrong, Mark. A lot of these weapons and armor, they're wicked safe. They get the jaws done off, but I'm gonna need real with it, right? All types of metal can get wicked fucked up. If you don't ability, ask home to help, then you gotta fix that shit, alright? So you can come ask the black and like me. I wanna make this crystal fucking clear. I'm your guy. Or you can get out there by yourself with just the words. Dude, I fucking love weapons. I mean, these are fucking wicked sweet, huh? They never betray you. They're never gonna make you feel like shit and fucking feelings and whatnot. So, you know, just act accordingly. Irrespective of shit, you know?
I would like to emphasize that that's just Josh. That's just what he sounds like. So he was really perfect for this. And of course, this is my pitch. Would you like to be in this mod? There are 25 characters still available for you, including Donald Xena, Petrus Thorlin, Snugly the Crow, Griggs of Vinheim, Princess Guinevere, Oswald of Kareem, Trek of Kareem, Siegermeyer, Katarina, and pretty much everyone else. Sadly, Solaire was recently taken by that cold email that I mentioned, which was really an enlightening thing of like, hey, maybe this thing isn't as weird as I thought it was, when someone had found this mod on Nexus Mods and simply emailed my professional email asking, hey, can I be Solaire in this? Which led to me meeting up with a total stranger 2 to 3 weeks ago at a little recording studio that's nearby my house to record the unhinged Bostonian Solaire line. So really bringing the community together here. Okay, and that is the program. Thank you so much.